Hi, I'm Mike McLean. Welcome to the Short Circuit podcast, brought to you by Swift Aircraft. In this series, we'll be chatting with a variety of people from all walks of life, but who all have one thing in common: aviation. We'll discuss how and why they got into aviation, what or who inspired them, and what they would say to encourage young people to get involved. Flight fascinates many of us, and our guests will explain why they are compelled to look to the sky. Today's guest is Angus Batey. He's a freelance journalist who has written extensively on music, crime fiction, media, sport, and defence. His music journalism has been published in most British national newspapers, and in specialist music magazines such as Mojo, NME, Q, and the Hip Hop Connection. He has also written about cinema, TV, literature, football, and cricket. His defence writing has appeared in newspapers and in specialist titles including Aviation Week, Combat Aircraft, Digital Battlespace, and Unmanned Vehicles. I only met Angus fairly recently when he visited Swift Aircraft headquarters, and it was his probing questions and obvious enthusiasm for aviation and its future development that made me think he would make a great guest for the Short Circuit podcast. I was delighted when he agreed to join us for a conversation, and it made our chat all the more interesting for me because I knew absolutely nothing about his background or experience prior to our chat. So, let's listen into this exploratory discussion. Good afternoon, Angus. How are you today?
I'm very well, Mike. Yourself?
I'm doing fine. All the pleasure for seeing you again so soon, because it hasn't been that long since we met last time. So welcome to the Short Circuit, as this podcast is known. Question number one for you, Angus Batey, is: who are you, and what's your current role as regards towards aviation?
Well, thank you very much for inviting me, Mike, and I hope that I don't end up causing all of your listeners to run for the exits, because my role in aviation is tangential, shall we say. I'm an interested outsider peering in to the industry rather than an active member of it, such as yourselves. But I'm a freelance journalist. And I write a lot for various parts of the Aviation Week Group, as well as various other people, but mainly for them. And I've been covering aviation-related matters for, I guess, between 15 and 20 years now.
All right, okay. That sounds all very intriguing and stuff. So the Aviation Week Group, they cover quite a wide range of things, I believe. And so, what's the subjects that you tend to focus on when you're writing?
Well, again, a little bit of a longer answer than perhaps you want, but I'll give you the full bit. When I first began writing for Aviation Week, I was actually writing for a monthly title that they published called Defence Technology International, and I wrote mainly about military aviation. And over the years, that's gradually changed as my experience has deepened, and as I've got to work with different members of staff within the organisation, and they've invited me to contribute to different titles and different web strands. I began working for their magazine Show News, which was published daily on site during major trade shows. It used to be a print magazine. Since the pandemic, it's been an app, which is what it is now. That broadened me out immediately into having to cover all sorts of other areas that initially I knew almost nothing about and very quickly had to learn. And in recent years, my focus has kind of shifted. So the majority of my writing at the moment is on business aviation, and increasingly on what we term the AAM space, advanced air mobility, which covers a multitude of different disciplines and ideas, but it would include the eVTOLs, the emerging sort of air taxi sector, as well as aircraft projects that are to do with sustainability or lower emissions flying. So the various people looking at hydrogen propulsion, for instance, I've been writing about, and anybody dealing with SAF and sustainability.
Okay, that sounds Totally intriguing and very absorbing. So you're covering quite a few bases there. That sounds great. I know that you've written for a lot of other stuff in the past, and I think you still do with music. You got yourself involved with NME and Mojo and Hip Hop Connection and that sort of thing.
Yes, this is. I wouldn't say it was my dirty secret as far as the aviation sector is concerned, but it's something that often intrigues people. And I really can't give you a better answer than to saying that these are all things that I've been interested in, and I've just been fortunate enough to be able to turn that interest into a career. But yeah, I began my journalism exclusively writing about music. Again, as I say, just an area that I was interested in, and I was able to string a few sentences together in a way that people felt was acceptable enough to put into magazines and then give me some money for doing so. And so I wrote about music for well, I guess the first time I started writing paid pieces about music was probably in the very late 80s, early 90s. And that was all I did really for about 10 or 15 years. I got to the point where I was thinking, I kind of have to look for something else, because I'm no longer really going to be very credible when writing about pop music for young people, because I'm no longer a young person. And it was around that point that I started to look for other things, aviation being something I was interested in, and I ended up in that area. But as it turned out, my decision was a good one, but it was made for perhaps the wrong reasons. There's still quite a lot of people who are my age, I'm in my 50s now, and older, who are writing very well, very credibly, very responsibly, very authoritatively about even brand new releases, never mind retro pieces about back in the day about music. But what did change, and what I was really lucky to get myself ahead of a bit, was that the music press was a sort of a canary in the coal mine for what happened to the rest of the media when digital technology came in and turned the industry on its head. The music industry was disrupted, to use that hateful term, by the emergence of MP3, and suddenly people could amass vast collections of music for free by digitally downloading things illegally or legally, later on legally. And suddenly the record industry had to change the way that it works, and it started to find ways to save money. And one of those ways was to no longer advertise in music magazines. And music magazines found that they were being undercut by the internet, because people didn't really need to buy a magazine to read a review of a new record, when they could firstly read the review on an online website that could publish it instantaneously and globally for no cost. And also they could go and hear the record before they bought it, or even if they ended up feeling the need to pay any money to listen to it whenever they wanted anyway. So that there was two sort of big movements against the music press that meant that they suffered a lot of the things that the wider general media has been going through since. And so I was fortunate to make a step away from that for the wrong reasons, but at the right time.
Okay, but you sort of drifted in towards aviation because it was something that interested you. So what was the thing that piqued your interest? Why did you get interested in aviation? How old were you? Was there a specific incident, or was it a specific aircraft? How did it start?
I think it's a two-part answer. As a child, I just remember at infant school, last period of the day was drawing. You could draw whatever you wanted, and for some reason I was always drawing Spitfires and Hurricanes, and my own little Battle of Britain thing. So I guess I'd always had that interest, and I don't know exactly where that came from. I was born in the late 60s, so I'm talking here about the 1970s. It's still some distance away from the Second World War, but I do remember probably the second film that I ever went to see at the cinema. My dad took me to see a reissue of the Battle of Britain film, and I guess that must have made a big impression. And we, my grandparents had lived through the war. My parents were small children during that time. It felt like a closer period of history than perhaps it does to children today. I don't know.
Mm.
So I guess I was always interested in that, and then I never really did anything with that interest. It never became a something that I pursued as I grew up and went through later stages of school. But I suppose the other incident would be in the 2000s. At some point, I took myself off on a 10-day driving holiday in the Western US.
All right.
I started in Las Vegas and I ended up in Los Angeles, going around in a big loop and just
Mhm.
staying various places. And I remember having read about the intrigue and mystery around Area 51.
All
So I
right.
decided I'd stop by Rachel, Nevada, and go to the do the thing where you go to the entrances that are on public land, and you get observed by the guys in the Jeep on the top of the hill who are
Mhm.
looking at you through their binoculars. And while I wasn't one of those sort of people who felt, oh, aliens must have been here and they've experimented on flying saucers and all that rubbish, I was fascinated by this idea of a secret technological research center, which is basically what it is, held in the middle of this public land, albeit a long way away from anywhere where very many people lived. I
Mhm.
found that whole visit was fascinating, and as a result, I got in touch with, as I was researching it afterwards and just thinking about it just for myself, not as a writing project, just because I was interested. I got to meet a couple of years later some of the guys who set up a veterans association called the Roadrunners, which was for people who had worked at Area 51 on the U2 and Oxcart, the A12, the precursor to the SR-71, on
Mhm.
those programs. And they just, I was thinking, crikey, these are the guys who used to work for not only the Air Force and the contractors, but the CIA, and who would have all had to sign these huge, on pain of death oaths of secrecy about what they did. But parts of what they had done had been declassified and they were able to talk about it. And when I got in touch, I just thought, they're going to think, here's this silly little guy from the other side of the world. What's he going to do? And we'll just ignore him. But it was absolutely the opposite. They were like, oh, you must come to our next reunion and you can come
Wow.
and talk to them. And so I 2 years later, I was back in Las Vegas at a casino just off the strip, listening to all these guys talking about the work that they did during the Cold War, and it was absolutely fascinating. And it kind of started from there, really. That became, because I'd done the research and the focus, and I'd realised that this world that I thought was probably going to be sealed off to outsiders, particularly in an area like that where there was classified technology being developed, even if the elements of that were no longer classified. Finding that they were welcoming, and not only welcoming but encouraging of somebody outside that wanting to learn about it, made me think that maybe there's some work that I can do here.
Right. Okay. That sounds fascinating. I'm incredibly jealous. I would love to. I never made it uh, out to Area 51 when I was in that part of the world, but it's a place it's on the bucket list. So I'll see if we can get there at some point.
It's
Um,
certainly, people talk to me about, the people go to Las Vegas for all sorts of the obvious reasons. There's maybe these days people go there for stag parties and things like that, which I mean, it's bizarre, but we'll come on to the sustainability thing later, I'm sure. But people, it's a holiday destination, and it's all the glitz and the over the top, the neon lights and the casinos and the money and and people sort of have this picture of it, and they think, oh, they either think I want to go there for that, or they'll think I'll never want to go there at all. But whenever I talk to anybody who's in the I'll never want to go there at all, I always sort of say, go there and use it as a base to go and drive out into the desert. Even if you're not interested in Area 51, that it's just an incredible experience to spend some time to go out and see this amazing landscape, the like of which we over here have no conception of.
Yeah, I've done a Greyhound bus ride across the states and been through that desert, and it does something to your head. It is
It really
fascinating.
does.
It
It
really
really
does.
does.
Going back to the development side of things, so you've talked to these guys who they invented the future back in the 50s and 60s and 70s. What do you see coming in the next 20, 30 years with regards to aviation, what things have piqued your interest or have caught your attention?
Well, and I'm not just saying this because it's Swift that I'm talking to, but I think the whole sustainability and different propulsion systems that's going to dominate all of what everybody in this industry is thinking about. We've got to find a way of continuing to fly that doesn't harm the environment, or that harms it less, at least. And I can't see any meaningful conversation that I'm likely to have over the foreseeable future that doesn't have some degree of connection with those issues, whether that be how do we develop hydrogen as a viable propulsion fuel source, how do we maximize the efficiency and the utility of electric motors, and how are we going to deal with the contrail issue? All sorts of these questions that have to be asked and answered if this industry is going to survive realistically. That's where I see the vast majority of attention being focused. And I certainly hope that's the case, and I expect that those are going to be the issues that are going to dominate the kind of conversations that I get to have for the foreseeable future.
Right. Okay. And these conversations, who are you having them with? I mean, who, apart from the likes of Swift, which is a small new start, I mean, what access do you get within the industry? I mean, is it more defense type stuff, or is it civilian type stuff, or how does it work for you on a regular basis?
Well, it's a sort of a chicken and egg situation. I sometimes I end up writing about something because I'm given an opportunity to speak to somebody or to visit a place, and because I'm the person who's going there, then I'll write the story. Sometimes I have an idea that I'd like to write, and so I approach people to see if they will be willing to speak to me. So it's a blend of my interests and the opportunities that I either generate for myself or I'm given by folks within the industry. I'm fortunate enough now to have been doing this long enough to be on the radar of the PR and the comms teams for a lot of different people. And so when you'll know from being inside the industry how this tends to work is a company develops a new product and they're keen to talk about it. So they get in touch with outlets that will likely cover it and invite them to come along to some event or to listen to a presentation or to come and see an aircraft flying or whatever. Or perhaps they debut a new design or a new product or a new prototype or a model at an air show, and they will then also let us know that they're going to do this, and we set up an opportunity to sit down with them in advance of that or at the show or following it. So there's lots of ways that you can get access, and it's really just a case of that's how PR works in any industry. People, some companies are really good at it. Some people maybe less so for deliberate reasons. Maybe the kind of work that they're doing is not something that they can very easily talk about in public. A lot of the time in this industry, more so than the music industry, perhaps there's reticence to go into very much detail because they've made some sort of binding agreement with a particular client that limits the amount that they can talk about a particular development or product or idea. But it's funny, I do often compare it to the music industry. They're not very similar in in very many ways, really, but it struck me as amazing that there was one time I was writing, because I'd done various bits and pieces with different squadrons in the Royal Air Force. I was in touch there. The Royal Air Force, like any other entity, employs comms people, PR people. Sometimes they're ex-military, or sometimes they're serving military. Sometimes they're civilians. They sometimes work at bases. Sometimes they work in MOD main building. But you talk to these people, you ask them what opportunities might be coming up, and they tell you. And one conversation that I'd been having repeatedly over a period of time was to find out if there might be any possibility of gaining some access to one of the squadrons that holds the QRA, Quick Reaction Alert duty, the guys who are effectively the same as the Spitfire pilots in World War II. They're sitting with their flight kit on, waiting for somebody to ring the bell to tell them scramble, scramble, and jump into the cockpit and take off. And these people these days obviously are doing that because there might be a non-responsive aircraft. Usually when this happens, it's it's a Russian military aircraft deliberately flying close to the borders of UK airspace, doesn't have its transponder turned on because that's the way that they do it. So they go up there and they sort of say hi, wave at them, and make sure that they don't come into UK airspace. Sometimes it's a civilian aircraft where there's something going on with their comms. But worst case scenario, it could be a hijacked airliner, and perhaps these people might actually have to be in that horrible and unenviable situation of having to shoot down a jet with civilians on board because it's been hijacked and it's headed towards a major city. Mercifully, that's never happened but it's a possibility every time that bell rings, as it were. So this is, it's a capability that we all know exists, but access to it is understandably limited, and the amounts of what people can say when they're doing that job to the general public are, pretty strictly delineated. But it's possible, and I got the opportunity to go and talk to some of the guys and girls who were operating the QRA system from Scotland. And at the same time, I was still doing bits of music journalism, and I was trying to get hold of a copy of the new Kanye West LP so that I could review it. And they wouldn't send it to me because it was going to be it was such a great risk of being leaked onto the internet before the release date that such a thing was impossible. And it just struck me as ironic that here we have a real life and death mission that's being carried out 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, bank holidays, Christmas, everything. There's people there doing this job. It's extremely central to national security. It's literally a life and death subject, and the people who do it are extremely highly trained professionals, and there's a lot of secrecy around it. Yet it was easier for me to go and talk to them and find out about them and what they do and how they do it than it was to get a copy of a new record by a pop star.
Yeah, it tells you an awful lot about people's priorities and where money ranks in the on the scale of things. Fascinating. No, that sounds good. So that was up at Lossiemouth, I take it, with the Typhoons?
No, it was before that. It was at what was it called? The base that they closed a little bit further south.
Lucas.
Yes, Lucas, when they were still flying the Tornadoes, the F3s.
All right, okay. This mixture of aviation and music, it's not an obvious link, but you seem to be riding those two tigers quite comfortably. Is it one thing that you've seen or experienced so far that you think is going to be something that will become household knowledge in the next, say, 10 years, 15 years, particularly on the propulsion side of things?
I'm not sure that I've got a good answer for you on that, really. I would hope that some of what we're seeing in development at the moment will become commercially viable technology that will become everyday. But I fear that there are many obstacles in the way of even the best and most technically viable solutions that are going to stymie even the cleverest and shrewdest developers, and perhaps hold up development of these ideas, or maybe even curtail them entirely. By which I mean, one of the things that I repeatedly find, and I know I'm not alone in seeing this, but I have no solutions, and I don't know that anybody else necessarily does either. You have this you have here a series of goals and ideas and aspirations. If we're talking about, in the broadest sense, zero emissions flight, we're talking about technologies that are going to take decades to develop. And they're all going to be underpinned to some degree by policy decisions and funding decisions that will be taken by political leaders who work on a 5-year cycle. And every 5 years, they have to enter a popularity contest to re-secure their job. And every 5 years, there's that risk of a change of direction. And every 5 years, there's an 18-month cycle during which, in the lead up to the popularity contest or election or whatever you want to call it, that focus is diverted away from the day-to-day necessities and onto the promises that have to be made in order to win the popularity contest. So my worry is that we don't manage to match those timescales, that the technology development will always take longer than the political cycles allow. And we end up with some great ideas not being brought to fruition because the underpinning strategies that they would have to work within keep getting changed.
That's a very sharp insight. Unfortunately, I think it's a case of history repeating itself as well. I think that's happened many times in the past. And yeah, I think you might be right in that one.
But just look, I mean, hydrogen, let's set aside any of the people who are working on hydrogen propulsion systems and the specifics of their propulsion technologies. If we just assume that hydrogen is the answer, how are we going to get it to airports? You're not going to be able to fly a hydrogen aircraft to somewhere where you can't refuel it. So there's got to be hydrogen available everywhere. Where are we going to get the hydrogen from? Where's the investment going to come in the renewable electricity that we're going to need to generate the green hydrogen in this country? Are we going to get green hydrogen generated elsewhere in the world and then turn it into brown hydrogen or whatever you want to call it by having to put it on container ships that emit carbon and bring it here? There's all these questions we're still only beginning to ask, and we need to have them answered now in a way that people will have some certainty to be able to make the investment decisions that they need to make to turn the technologies into reality in the 2050 timescale.
So this is the infrastructure is maybe the thing that we need the next generation of young engineers and young people getting involved in aviation to focus on. It's not necessarily building new aircraft, but it's all the stuff that goes around it. Would you say?
Yes, but I think it's all of the above, isn't it? I mean, hydrogen, as you guys are finding, all you know far better than I do. The use of hydrogen as a fuel on board an aircraft demands different approaches to how you design the aircraft. Where are you going to put it in the airframe? What form is it going to take? What other equipment are you going to have to carry? It limits or changes the calculus that you have to make as a designer. But then where it's going to come from and how it's going to be made, refined or generated or whatever you want to call it, all of those questions have to be asked and answered as well. And they all have to be, all these discussions have to be proceeding pretty much in lockstep at the same pace at the same time.
So on the STEM thing, on the STEM side of things, with young people coming through, it's pretty much a yes or no answer, but it would the greater aviation world be something that if you were chatting to a young person today and say, well, I don't know where my career is going to go, is it something that you would suggest that is worth getting into, or would you steer them away from it?
No, absolutely, it's worth getting into. It's the place where some of the biggest challenges that face our civilization are being asked and answered. If you want to be part of doing something that really is going to change lives, then this is a sector that you really do want to be involved in. And to the STEM thing, I would say I got an E in physics A level many years ago. Anything that scraped me that pass, I've long forgotten. My other qualifications are in arts subjects. I don't profess to be a technologist or a physicist or an engineer, and I'm certainly not a mathematician, but I've been able to find some role here. And I think that this is an important part when we talk about STEM teaching. I know that the STEAM is another acronym that's being used, but I think the way that arts are integrated into that is a fairly specific. I worry that a focus on STEM solely will lead to a surfeit of really great engineering talent who struggle to explain the brilliant ideas that they've got in a way that other people can understand. I think learning to write and being able to express yourself in ways other people can understand is a really important part of it, and it shouldn't be neglected. And sometimes there's a role for people who are maybe just good at the writing and the explaining part and don't really have much of the technical knowledge. And I would say that, you know, to somebody who might be in that boat themselves, who feel like aviation is an area that interests them, but they don't have a technological gift or a technological background, that needn't be a barrier either. There are jobs that you can do within aviation that don't rely on being a maths whiz or an engineering genius.
If I could distill that into a t-shirt, I would, because that's exactly what I've been thinking. No, that's fantastic. Right, so now we come to the hardest question of all. So for our virtual control tower, we have the scoreboard on the wall, and on there at the moment there are a number of aircraft, and these have been selected by other participants, other guests. So the question is, what is your favorite aeroplane, and what is the one thing about it that makes it your favorite aeroplane?
Okay. It is the hardest question. Who can have a favorite airplane? It's like, I don't have any children, but I wouldn't be able to tell you which one was my favorite if I had more than one, I don't suppose. I'm not saying that I feel paternal towards any aircraft, but I've been close to a few that I felt quite strongly about. I got an opportunity, an amazing opportunity, again, to the point about secrecy and all the rest of it. I had an amazing opportunity some years ago to visit Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri, and spent a couple of days around the folks operating the B-2.
Right.
Got to sit in one.
Wow.
Got to have a look all over the thing. That's an amazing aircraft, and I felt absolutely privileged to have had that opportunity. I've flown in the jump seat in the cockpit of a C-130, so I'll never hear a word said against that platform. I'm amazed every time I see an Osprey, though I've never had a chance to fly in one. Spitfires, Hurricanes, you know. I live across the road from the Imperial War Museum at Duxford, and I think my favourite aircraft that I like to see flying out of there is actually the Catalina. It's just incredibly beautiful, very unusual, but a great thing. Because you've asked for a particular characteristic as well, and I think my characteristic for your control tower wall, and hopefully this isn't necessarily one that you've already had, my characteristic is going to be sustainability.
Oh, right, okay.
And therefore, what I'm going to choose as my favorite aeroplane is what is now the Airbus Zephyr. The high altitude pseudo satellite is what they're marketing it as, HAPS. It flies at 85,000 feet, right at the edge of the stratosphere. It's solar powered. It's launched by 4 people who just run along a runway and let it go like a paper aeroplane. It's extremely light. It carries a 5-kilogram active payload, and it can stay aloft, in theory, indefinitely. I first became aware of this aircraft when it was a project run by Kinetic. It was then transferred later to Airbus. I had an opportunity to meet the guy who designed it, Chris Kelleher, who sadly is no longer with us. And he was such a kind and gracious and enthusiastic man who really understood that there were many ways of skinning the cat, to use that perhaps rather unpleasant expression. But there's a lot of things that you can do that aren't necessarily to do with being faster, louder, bigger, more of what we've already got. There was a different way of approaching a series of different questions and answering them in ways that perhaps people would have found unexpected. And I think what he did with the Zephyr and what they're doing with that program is absolutely fascinating. And I'm going to say that's my favorite aircraft.
Okay. Angus Batey, fantastic. Your timing is spot on. Thank you very much for your time and your insights, which have been, very thought-provoking. So, journalist, musician or music writer, aviation enthusiast, and lover of the Airbus Zephyr. So, dear listener, that was Angus Batey. The slightly abrupt ending was due to the loss of signal during recording, but fortunately we were literally finishing up, so we lost nothing significant. But I think you'll agree that Angus is a well-informed and thoughtful interviewee. It was a pleasure to chat, and it's not every day that you get to talk to someone who sat in a B-2 stealth bomber, one of the most secret aircraft ever revealed. I disagree with him that he isn't really part of the industry. What he writes will be read by others who may be more technically involved, but words and knowledge have power and influence. Those with artistic and creative skills have a role in aviation and other STEM environments, and should not be underestimated. For some, it is words that are #inspiring aviation, not numbers and loud noises. Angus's choice of the near-silent, fragile, almost otherworldly Airbus Zephyr was a big surprise. An aircraft that is designed to operate almost indefinitely at altitudes of over 23 kilometers or 76,000 feet, while only weighing around 65 kilos and running on solar power, is really pushing the boundaries of technology. Having the insight, knowledge and imagination to select that aircraft shows a thoughtful approach to the future and gives us yet another unique aircraft for our virtual control tower wall. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed our chat, and we'll see you next time here on The Short Circuit. Fly safe. You have been listening to The Short Circuit, presented by Mike McLean and sponsored by Swift Aircraft with the #InspiringAviation. This has been a Zoom Spike production.